Hello everyone, it is Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. In this week's poll, I gave voters a choice between two of the tribes that are going to be supported in Dominaria, Wizards and Knights. In the end, Wizards came out on top. Wizards appear across all colors in Magic, though they do have their greatest concentration in blue. Wizards are one of the most plentiful creature types there are in the game, with 638 of them printed so far. In this video, we're going to talk about the 10 that have had the biggest impact on Magic at its highest competitive level. Before we get to number 10, a quick reminder on how I score these. Pro Tour, Vintage, and Legacy Championship top 8s are all worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now let's get to number 10. At number 10, we have the first of 3 invitational cards that made the list. I did a top 10 on invitational cards just a few weeks back, but if you don't know what an invitational card is, it is a card that was designed by the winner of the now-defunct tournament called the Magic Invitational. This means pro players design the cards, and not only that, they also get to put their likeness on it. In 2000, the winner was Chris Picula, and his card is Meddling Mage, a 2-mana 2/2 wizard who lets you turn off a card in your opponent's deck as long as it's in play. Especially devastating against combo decks, it was also good against decks that were built around one particular strategy. You could also always just name removal, making sure the Mage and all the rest of your board stays safe. The Mage picked up 1 Pro Tour top 8 at the Block Pro Tour and only picked up 1 Grand Prix top 8 in Standard its first time through. In Extended, it saw a lot of play though, especially in an aggro control deck called Super Grow, but also in aggressive decks like White Weenie, Affinity, and Zoo. In some of these decks, it was a sideboard card used to shut off opponents' hate cards. Since it got reprinted in Alara Reborn, it got another run through Standard, though it didn't do much with that, only putting up 2 Grand Prix top 8s. However, what's important is that printing made it legal in Modern, and it has picked up several Grand Prix top 8s in that format in the last few months. It has started seeing play in Collected Company decks where it is a nice hit off the top of your library, especially if you have an idea of what's in your opponent's hand. Most recently, it has become one of the cards in the human decks that have recently jumped to Tier 1 in Modern, as it offers solid stats and a disruptive ability along with the important human creature type. At number 9, we have a wizard who hates red decks, and a card that has been a key in keeping burn decks in check ever since it was printed, Burrenton Forge Tender. While primarily a sideboard card, it is pretty clear that the Forge Tender plays a major role in formats, especially Modern. The fact that burn can't kill it and that it can just completely blank a red burn spell is excellent. Burn decks usually have a finite amount of gas, and when they run out of it, they're in trouble, and the Forge Tender blanks one of those spells, and that goes a long way towards making sure they run out of gas before they can kill you. While it saw play in Block and Standard, its real first home was Extended, where Burn was a Tier 1 deck, and these days in Modern, where Burn continues to be a Tier 1 deck. At number 8, we have a wizard who steals your opponent's creatures, and that is Sower of Temptation. This is a very strong turn 4, or potentially earlier play, as it lets you add a 2/2 flying threat to the board, who has a relevant creature type in a lot of the decks it was in this case fairies though, not actually the wizard part, and you get to move one of your opponent's blockers out of the way or maybe steal their best creature. Sure, the Sower dies to a ton of removal, but if your opponent doesn't have it, you're probably just going to win. And oh yeah, a lot of the decks running Sower of Temptation ran ways of avoiding removal, including Counter Magic and Scion of Una. Fairies were an incredibly powerful deck across multiple formats in the latter part of the first decade of the 21st century, and Sower of Temptation was a big part of that. The Sower was so powerful it even saw play outside of Fairies decks, though, even though that was their primary home. In Block Constructed, it picked up 9 Grand Prix top 8s in Fairy decks and 2 in non-Fairy decks. In Standard, it saw heavy play in 2 different decks. The obvious one, Fairies, but also in Revelark decks, where reanimating Sower of Temptation was a possibility. Being in 2 of the top tier decks of that Standard format alone allowed it to amass 31 points in Standard. Fairies were also good in Extended and in the early days of Modern, so of course it saw play in those formats too. While it hasn't seen a top 8 in any format since 2015, Fairies are a deck on the periphery in Modern right now, so it is possible that the Sower will pick up a few more points in the future. At number 7, we have a Planeswalker, but one who starts as a wizard, and that is, of course, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, who transforms into Jace, Telepath Unbound. Control decks were happy to have the looting effect he provides on the front, and he was not very difficult to flip on turn 3 or 4 with the help of fetch lands and cantrips. Once he flipped, he could start helping you cast instants and sorceries out of your graveyard, giving you massive card advantage. If he has to, he can also protect himself with a +1 ability. His emblem isn't all that powerful, but let's be real, you're basically never going to use it. The real power is in that -3 ability, because it gives you a second chance to cast powerful removal spells, including board sweepers. Jace is one of the most played cards in all of Standard for a while, and while he slowed down after the fetches rotated out, he still managed to put up some consistent finishes in the last Standard format he was a part of. Jace managed to find his way basically into any deck that was mid-range or control and had blue in it. This included basically all of the Dragons decks, Jeskai control decks, and mid-range, and even Bant Company decks, as well as many more. He has a single Grand Prix top 8 in Modern and a Grixis control deck from back in 2015, and in the last year or so he has also started seeing play in Magic's most powerful formats, Vintage and Legacy, where he has appeared primarily in Monastery Mentor decks. At number 6, we have the only cat wizard to make the list, and that is Qasali Pridemage. A 2-mana 2/2 with the powerful Exalted mechanic, the Pridemage also benefits from being a creature that can be run or sided into any aggro deck, while also providing utility against artifacts and enchantments in addition to its great stats. It saw some play in Standard and some in Extended before the format was axed, but it has found the most success in Modern in a variety of decks. In the beginning, this was in Zoo and Birthing Pod decks, the latter of which was capable of tutoring up any creature it wanted to, and it fit well in there because sometimes what you really needed to search up was a way to destroy artifacts or enchantments. Birthing Pod eventually got banned, but the Pridemage sees play in the spiritual successors of those decks, Court of Calling and Collected Company decks, where it fills basically the same role. It has had similar success in Legacy, where its ability to blow up artifacts is arguably even more useful, and it hasn't seen play there since 2014. However, it does still see play consistently in Modern, so you can bet it will continue to add to its score. At number 5, we have the second invitational card on the list, this one designed and bearing the likeness of Bob Marr, Dark Confidant. The Confidant is a powerful card because it provides you with card advantage. Sure, you have to take some damage when you do, but the decks that run Dark Confidant are the kind that have low curves and don't take a ton of damage off of the extra card he draws you. He has found success in many formats. In Block, this included 2 top 8s in aggro decks. In Standard, it included 2 more Pro Tour top 8s in aggro decks. But it really took off in Extended. It saw play in all manner of decks there, provided they had a low average converted mana cost. This included control decks like Psychotog and aggressive decks like Zoo and other Tarmogoyf decks. And it even showed up in combo decks like Dark Depths and Thopter Depths. After Extended ended in 2010, he became a fixture in the newly created Modern format where he has continued to thrive for about a decade now, primarily in Jund and Abzan decks, and more recently in the human tribal decks, putting up great results these days. Legacy is another format that isn't safe from Dark Confidant, though he hasn't seen play there since 2015. And at number 4, we have the second double-faced wizard to make the list, Delver of Secrets, who of course transforms into Insectile Aberration. One of the most powerful commons in the game, and many players' picks for best one-drop creature ever, Delver of Secrets is basically a 1-mana 3/2 with flying, which is nuts. And yeah, obviously he isn't literally a 1-mana 3/2 with flying, but every deck that runs Delver of Secrets has a very high chance of flipping it off of the first activation, and it is very likely it transforms before it gets killed. Delver has seen play in every format possible, and every format has had, at one point or another, a deck with Delver in its name, a true indication of how powerful it is. In Standard, its primary home was Blue-White Delver, which was one of the more dominant decks of the Standard format of the time. In Modern, Delver isn't super popular right now, but for a while Grixis and Blue-Red Delver were Tier 1 decks. In Legacy, it sees play in Bug Delver, Grixis Delver, 4-color Delver, and you get the point. Lots of Delver decks in Legacy. In Vintage, it appears in the eponymous Blue-Red Delver deck, but also in Canadian Threshold. At number 3, we have the only wizard on the list that hasn't previously appeared on an MTG top 10, and that is Grim Lavamancer. Actually, one of my favorite cards. The Lavamancer is powerful because it has an activated ability that allows you to use Shock basically every turn. Sure, you have to have some fuel in your graveyard, but the Lavamancer sees success in formats loaded with cheap cantrips and fetch lands, or in burn decks that quickly empty their hand, so having enough fuel to use his ability is usually pretty easy. Being able to kill small creatures or represent inevitability by hitting your opponent for 2 every turn makes the Lavamancer an incredibly threatening 1-drop. Grim Lavamancer was originally printed in Torment, but then reprinted in Magic 2012, giving him 2 different opportunities in Standard and making him legal in Modern. His first time through, he didn't actually see a ton of success. There just weren't decks in that Standard that could make him into the weapon that he is, and he only managed to pick up 2 Grand Prix top 8s in 2002. After being reprinted, Grim Lavamancer was on the Standard scene again in 2011 and 2012. Its primary home in that Standard format was in a traditional red aggro deck. Red Deck Wins, where he sort of filled the role that Ramunap Ruins played in more recent versions of Red Deck Wins. He could do the last few damage to your opponent and close out the game. While it wasn't popular in Standard right away after it was printed, it found homes in other formats from the very day it was printed. In Extended, for example, it was a fixture in red deck wins and burn decks starting in 2002, and it remained relevant in that capacity until 2008. These days, the Lavamancer sees the most play in Modern, with Jund decks being its most frequent home, but it has also found its way into some builds of Burn, Zoo, and Splinter Twin, and has recently begun serving as an alternate win condition in Hollow One decks, decks which rapidly fill their graveyards and thus give plenty of fuel to Grim Lavamancer. While Modern is where you can expect to see the most of him, he also sees a lot of play in Legacy, primarily alongside fellow wizard Delver of Secrets. It even has one Vintage Championship top 8, which came in a Canadian Threshold deck in 2014, and of course, Threshold decks like to fill their graveyard, so the Lavamancer had lots of fuel for his fire. At number 2, we have the second Fairy Wizard to make our list, Vendilion Clique. This is an incredible card that provides an efficient body in the air that can beat the opponent down while also disrupting their game plan, since you can take away their best card. It also has Flash, so it is well suited for a deck looking to play a lot of instant speed interaction, since you can cast your counter magic and removal if you have to, and flash in the Clique at the end of their turn in other situations. Fairies was a strong deck across multiple formats in Magic, and the Clique found success in those decks, where its creature type mattered, in formats like Block, Standard, and Extended, but it sees a lot of play outside of Fairy decks too, especially in Modern and Legacy, where it has shown up primarily in control decks, many of which also run Delver of Secrets. It also saw play in Splinter Twin decks when those were legal in Modern. These days, its most common home in Modern are Blue Moon, Jeskai Control, and Through the Breach. In Legacy, it also sees play, once again alongside Delver of Secrets, where the two provide the primary win conditions for many control decks. It even sees play in Vintage decks, primarily in Canadian Threshold and Monastery Mentor. Vendilion Clique continues to see a lot of play and will continue to add to its score, but I'm not sure it will ever catch the number 1 card on this list, which is a card it's finished number 2 behind once before, and it's the last of the invitational cards on this list. It's appeared as the number 1 card on 3 other MTG top 10s as well, so this makes the 4th, which is a pretty impressive record. And this was the invitational card designed by Tiago Chan, and that is Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster Mage is a control player's dream, capable of flashing back any spells in your graveyard, which usually means counter magic and removal. Basically always a 2-for-1, Snapcaster Mage is an incredibly powerful card whose success began in the block format and has continued all the way to the present day, especially in Modern. It was a key card in many standard control decks of the time, finding the most success in Delver decks and in Grixis Control. In Modern, it has continually seen play since it was printed in basically any deck running blue. In the early days of Modern, this meant Delver, but has more recently included decks like Scapeshift, Gifts Ungiven, Splinter Twin when it was legal, Blue Moon, and most recently, Grixis Death's Shadow. Tiago Chan's card has even proven strong enough for Magic's Eternal formats, which have several cheap counter spells and card draw spells that the Mage can recast for you, frequently appearing alongside Delver of Secrets in those formats as well. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. Also, don't forget to vote in the poll for next Friday's MTG Top 10. You can find a link to that in the description below. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help my channel continue to improve, you can contribute to my Patreon in the description below. Thanks for watching.